Do you sometimes wonder how you could truly have an impact when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How do you know you are moving in the right direction when it comes to becoming a more inclusive individual? As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod brings topics such as ethnicity, genders, sexuality, religion on the table. We talk about research and science, but also emotions, feelings, and vulnerability. We discuss allyship, advocacy, privilege, but most importantly, we talk action. Because without action, we stay still. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, stillness is never the answer. Welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. In this episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod, I have the pleasure to welcome Katherine Klimitas. Katherine is a New Orleans-based artist and designer who sold her first watercolor at age 10. As the daughter of veterinarians, Katherine expresses her family's lifelong love of animals through her meticulous lifelike paintings. She earned a BA from Loyola University in 2011 and today, at age 33, runs her multifaceted business KK Art and Designs from home. When clients learn that Katherine has Osteogenesis Imperfecta, also known as brittle bone disease, they are captivated by her unique perspective. She and her parents stopped counting her broken bones at 500 at age 10. She's 2 feet 7 inches tall, gets around in an electric wheelchair, and creates all of her art, jewelry, and commercial graphic design while lying on her side. Welcome to another episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Welcome to another episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Today I have great pleasure to have an amazing guest with us to talk about a topic we haven't really talked about so far. So I'm really happy that we have the chance to connect. So Katherine, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes, I'm very glad to have you as well. I mean, we connected a few days ago and we discussed a little bit about topics we're going to talk about, and I think it's going to be a very exciting episode and lots of things to learn from as well. So, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, it should be a lot of fun.
Yes. Well, let's dive in and start with my usual question that I ask all my guests, and that's, Katherine, what's your story?
What's my story? So I am an artist and graphic designer. I live outside of New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States. And I have a genetic bone disease called Osteogenesis Imperfecta, which is also known more commonly as brittle bone disease. And it basically means that my bones break easily and they grow abnormally. So I use a wheelchair, an electric wheelchair for mobility. I'm only 2 foot 7 inches tall, and I have an aide with me almost all the time because I can't do a lot of my daily activities by myself. I grew up going to a mainstream school. So, until my senior year, I pretty much was the only person in a wheelchair in my entire school. And one of the problems was that I couldn't always go out and do things that my friends were doing. Mm-hmm. I couldn't always go play. Well, I could never go play football or soccer or anything like that. And so my parents tried to come up with activities that I could do because I was really smart and I was really bored and I was driving them crazy. So when I was 5, my mom bought me my first watercolor set. And, it was one of those super cheap cake watercolor sets that you would buy a 5-year-old. And I went through it in a couple of days, as well as all of the computer paper in the house. and I got really interested in it, even at 5 years old. And my parents realized that you know, watercolor and just art in general was not only something I could physically do, but it was something I really liked and that I was pretty good at, even at 5. So they put me in, of course, art in school, but then all kinds of other art classes. I had private art teachers and I had like summer camps, anything they could put me in, they did. And so by the time I was a young teenager, I had already gotten experience with all kinds of media. I had already gotten to do acrylic and oil and sculpture and even some glass blowing and printmaking and all kinds of things. And so let me back up just a little bit. My parents were both veterinarians. My mom is still practicing. My dad passed away several years ago. But so I grew up in a vet's office and I grew up surrounded by animals. And so when I would have to go to the office with them on Saturdays, again, I was bored. So I would sit in the waiting room and paint people's pets just because I was bored. And at some point, people started paying me to do that. And so if I wasn't hooked on art before, as a 12-year-old getting paid $20 or $40 a painting, then I was really hooked. And because, when you're 12, $20 is a lot of money, especially, in the 90s. So I was totally hooked then. And I just furthered my career in art through high school. I had some private lessons. They kind of made me cross over from art as a hobby as into like a professional career. And then I majored in graphic design in college. So after college, after I graduated, I graduated in 2011. After I graduated, I had a BA in graphic design, and I opened my own art and design business that I run out of my home. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Wonderful. And it's a beautiful story. And I love how we're starting already in so many different directions, so many things to unfold already. But one of the first questions I'd like to ask you, because I think that's very interesting, as you said, your parents decided to let you grow up in a mainstream school. And so what were some of the benefits? And I think here there's two sides. There is, I guess, your side of the story, but as well the benefits for the other children around you. So growing in one of these mainstream schools.
Yeah, definitely. There are benefits on both sides. I think that every child should be in a school setting at some point. Even children who are homeschooled. There's certainly something to be said for homeschooling, but when it comes to the social aspect of school, I think that's experience they can't get anywhere else. So for me, it was learning how to be around kids my own age because, I was always surrounded by adults because I had to be. I always had an adult with me. I was around my family a lot who were adults, and I loved it. I loved being around adults, and I learned I think I matured faster because I was around adults so much. I was never one of those kids that was scared to talk to an adult or anything like that. But around kids my own age, I didn't necessarily know how to do that as well until I got to school. And so for me, it was like every kid, learning how to socialize with other kids, and then also learning how to function when I couldn't necessarily do everything, and learning to be okay with that. So for me, that's where the value was. For the other kids, I kind of feel like they get more value, but they learn to be around someone who looks different than them, and they learn for it not to matter, which is really important. I have a friend that I've been friends with since we were 6, and we've been really close friends since we were 6, and she's told me several times, to us you were just Catherine, like there was no like special, or you were outcasted. Certainly like there were girls that picked on me and picked on her, but no more than any other teenage girl. It was not like I was outcasted or bullied or anything like that. It was just, teenage girl drama because everybody has it. Um, so for them, now as adults, they don't stare at people in wheelchairs in public. They're not scared to walk up to somebody in a wheelchair and say hi, or ask a question or something along those lines. They know how to act. And that's really important. They learn that from, I started school at 3 or 4 years old. They learn that from 3 or 4 years old on. And so I think that is a huge amount of value for them and for their parents as well.
No, that's very true. And I think I shared with you the other day one of my stories with someone in a wheelchair, and I don't remember younger as a child being surrounded at any point in time with someone in a wheelchair. And I think in my adulthood, indeed, sometimes you don't necessarily know how to behave, what's the right thing to do, and if there is anything you have to be careful about. And I think you're right. It creates an element where you're more aware, but as well you understand better what's the impact behind what you're doing and how you're behaving. As you said, like staring at people in the street, which I'm pretty sure is not a nice feeling to have. That's for sure.
No, it's not. It's not. I've learned to handle that though. When kids stare, it doesn't really bother me, right? Because they haven't learned yet what to do and what not to do. But when adults do it, my latest tactic is that I like to stare back at them and have like a staring contest and meet them like right in their eye, and it makes them feel super awkward, and then they usually just run away. So it works out well. It makes me laugh too, so it's good.
I like that.
You gotta have some fun.
Well, yes, make the most out of these situations, I guess.
That's right.
And so you mentioned a little bit some of the challenges as well, and I think that's probably the other question I wanted to ask you. What are some of the other challenges that you found growing in an environment like this came up for you and maybe for the kids around you?
Well, the hardest thing was just that I couldn't do everything they did. That was the main challenge. So like when I was in school, and if we had a field trip that was something like hiking, obviously I couldn't go do that. But normally what would happen is my parents would work with the school and they would come up with a different field trip that I could do that would teach me the same thing. So like, for example, if they were going on a hiking field trip and they were going to be learning about nature, maybe instead I go to like a nature museum or a nature center. And normally I would get to take a couple of my friends with me, so they would do that field trip with me instead. And it worked, and the reason it worked is because my parents made sure it did, and they made sure my teachers made it work. And I'm lucky because I had that. Now, the other thing is the kids had to learn how to be really careful around me, because it's especially when I was younger, it was very easy for me to break a bone, and so that is something they had to learn, that they couldn't throw balls around me and they couldn't roughhouse around me and they couldn't run around me and, things like that, which most of the time was not an issue, but they're kids, right? And sometimes things would happen and I would get hurt and they'd feel really bad about it. But then, we all move on. It is what it is. I can break a rib just by sneezing. So, it's not, unless somebody really, really messes up, like I rarely blame people for hurting me. Even as a child, I rarely blame people for hurting me because it was so easy to do, but yeah, I mean, that probably was a challenge for them, that they had to learn that.
No, makes sense indeed. And so you moved then into painting from starting, as you said, with a small cheap kit, just trying things out and then growing that passion. Um, what are some of the learnings you got from using that as a passion on the side? How
Um,
did it help you?
you mean like how did art help me live my life? Okay.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, what's nice about having art is when there were those times when I couldn't go do things my friends could do, I could always turn to that.
Yep.
I could always count on art, being able to do art. And also, it made me feel kind of special as a kid because my friends weren't making money selling
Hmm.
paintings. I mean, I was the only one doing that. I had one friend that kind of tried and she was okay, but it didn't work out for her. Um, but but yeah, I mean, it was just always a constant. It was always there, and and even today, I always feel like I can still learn more from it. I can always pick up another media or learn a new technique, or the learning in art is it's never ending. So when I as a child, when it was a hobby, it was something to keep me busy and something
Hmm.
to do, literally. But then when I decided it was going to be my career, I mean, it turned into a career. It turned into me making money and being able to support myself, which is really important.
Hmm. And I guess there is an element, and I think that's something you shared before as well, is when when you have that passion and that something, it's also what gives you that contribution to the outside world, and not
Yes,
just it's not just a passion as well. It's how do I impact the world around me?
exactly. Because if you have a talent, whether it's art or singing or whatever, if you don't share it, I mean, does it really matter? It doesn't.
Hmm.
It doesn't really matter. You know.
Yeah, definitely. And I think would you say that's something that is important for most people actually? And we talk about diversity and inclusion here, so we can talk about underserved communities as well as probably the ones who are in the majority. Do you feel that this is something that is important in terms of kind of because this is a topic that is very important to me, and I think I never thought about it in that way, around becoming a resilient individual and bouncing back from some of our challenges that we encounter on a daily basis. Do you feel that's something that helped you go through that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think everyone has something. They just have to figure
Hmm.
out what it is. You know,
Yeah.
um, whether it is a talent or it's teaching or it's mentoring kids or it's taking care of sick people or whatever it is. Everybody's got something that they can give. They
Hmm.
have to figure out what it is, and that something is what's going to help you deal with your own challenges. Because like
Yeah.
not everybody has a physical disability, but everybody has something. They have taking care of a sick family member, or they
Hmm.
have maybe they have an addiction problem, or they've lost all their possessions in a natural disaster, or they've lost a family member. I don't know, but everybody has some kind of challenge, major
Hmm.
challenge that they work through, you know, through their entire lives. And when you find your passion or your purpose, it helps you deal with it.
Yeah. No, very true. And I think again, that's something I keep repeating to most of my clients when it comes to coaching. And you're right, we all have something. I have actually an ex-colleague. I was doing coaching sessions, group coaching sessions with them at the time, and one of my favorite realizations was that colleague who came to me after everybody was sharing a little bit about some of the things that they were struggling with, and I apologize for the language, but he looks at me and he goes like, "We're all a little bit fucked up, aren't we?" And I was like, That's not, I'm not sure I would have used that exact word, but it's a good way to summarize it. We
I
do
don't know.
all have our challenges.
That might make a great T-shirt. Um,
Yes.
uh, yeah, I think that would sell really well.
I'll let you do
Yeah, I'll work on that. But yeah, I mean, he's totally right. We've all got something going on, and yeah, finding your passion definitely helps you deal with that.
And so you've turned your passion into a kind of a self employed thing. Have you ever considered going to work for a company at any point in time?
I did right out of college, or right before I graduated. The way the program worked that I attended, you applied for jobs at the end of it, basically. So, in theory, you would be leaving school with some kind of job lead, you would hope. And I had a couple, and I decided not to take them because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, I grew up with two parents who each had their own veterinary practices, so they each ran a small business. And so it didn't scare me to run a small business. I grew up helping my parents make the deposits on Saturdays and, run invoices. I started answering the phones at my mom's office when I was 10. It wasn't like, it didn't scare me to talk to people and promote myself and, that kind of thing. So it was natural. It was like a natural movement for me. And then the second thing is that there are days where I really hurt, and it's not a lot. I don't think it's, a ton, but there are days where like it would be really hard for me to go into an office. And it does take extra effort for me to leave my house because, we've got to put the wheelchair in the car and then somebody's got to be with me and then we've got to drive. And like, if something is going on with my car, that's a problem because my car is the one that picks up the wheelchair. So like it is more complicated. The other thing is I lay down to work. So it's easier for me to lay down and lay on my side to do almost everything. And so that would be a hard accommodation for some offices. And I'm sure some would make it, but that would be a hard accommodation. And so it was just easier. It was just the easier path. I can work in my pajamas. That's really a major perk. It's, of course, when we're on a video call like this, I'm not, but it is a plus to be able to work in your pajamas.
Indeed.
So yeah, it just works for me. And I think for a lot of people with physical disabilities, if you can find something that makes your life physically easier, if your job is physically easier and you don't have to figure out transportation, because like in New Orleans, we don't have a good public transportation system as far as disabled stuff goes. It just doesn't exist yet. And, that's not even an option for me. So, yeah, so it works.
And one question that is, I think, interesting linking to that is, do you feel the world out there is ready for people with different abilities? You mentioned transportation in New Orleans. From the outside world, you always imagine the US being maybe a bit more advanced on some of these things. I remember being in London, and it was not even a problem of ability, but I had my young child in a buggy. It was a nightmare going around already and we're talking about a child that potentially I could take out of the buggy and make her walk. So what are your thoughts about that, and what needs to be done still?
Oh, it's a lot. I think it depends on where you go. I've never left. Well, that's not true. I've been to the Bahamas and Mexico, but I've never been to Europe, so I couldn't comment on that. But as far as in the United States, it depends on where you go. like New York City, for example, they have an excellent bus system. Like their bus system, every bus has a wheelchair accessible feature. There's a way to get in it. It's quick, it's easy, and the buses go everywhere. As long as you figure out your schedule and you work it around the bus schedule, you're great. However, on the other hand, in New York City, the subway system's terrible. I mean, most of the time the elevators don't work, and it's impossible to get a handicapped accessible taxi.
Yep.
You just can't get it. It's absolutely impossible. So that's a problem. The other thing about big cities like New York or Chicago, I've been to a few places in California, Las Vegas, all the sidewalks are ramped. So, these big cities have done that. New Orleans is getting there. They're trying, and there has been some improvement. But the problem with a city like New Orleans is that it's very historical. And so the city wants to preserve that history. And in order to preserve that history, historically, there was no handicapped access, right? So they don't want to do things like add elevators or add ramps or redo bathrooms so that they're accessible. I was in a bathroom the other night at a concert venue, and the stall was big enough, but the door opened in. And so when you brought the wheelchair in, you couldn't close the door. I mean, it's clear that somebody in a wheelchair did not okay that stall.
Yep.
And so, for progress to happen, what needs to happen is people in wheelchairs need to be the ones saying, no, this is what needs to happen. And this is how it needs to be fixed. These are the problems. And this is how it needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often. You can look at most concert venues and the handicap section's in the back. Well, we can't stand up. So why would you put the handicap section in the back? That doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
So it's things like that. And I, as you can probably already tell, I love live music, and that's like my thing. I love to go see live music. So that's one of the issues that I'm like, particularly, I advocate a lot for because that's my hobby. It's that we need to ask the right people what needs to be done and how it needs to be done.
Yeah. And you're completely right. And I think that's something that keeps coming back whenever I talk about diversity and inclusion from anyone. It's you need to include everyone to be able to come to those solutions. And
right.
and I had a conversation a few months ago with someone as well in similar situations, is that ultimately, and I think I gave that example now as well, ultimately it doesn't only help people with different abilities, it helps a lot of other people as well in similar ways. I think the example she gave at the time was like, when you're coming back from shopping and you have so many shopping bags that, I don't know, you can't open the door, so you can just push a button and the door opens automatically, things like that actually even have a positive impact on the rest of the society. So why would you not even think about including people that can tell you, well, this works, this doesn't work, and these are the reasons why, and that's why we should do things differently.
Exactly. If there was a ramp or an elevator, your child, you wouldn't have had a problem with your child in the stroller.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so one of the other things that you advocate quite a bit about, I believe, is around inclusion in schools. So tell us a bit more about it. You mentioned already a few things and some of the benefits, but what are some of the things that we can do concretely to advance some of these topics in the school environment?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what we just said about you need to ask the right people. So every disabled person is different and is going to need different accommodations. And so, like, for me, I needed a table to lay on, and I needed a space for my aide to sit, and I needed to not be in the hallways when everybody else was, because I would get smacked in the head with backpacks and whatever, which is not a good thing. So, I didn't, and I needed handicapped bathrooms. I needed a bathroom I could use. And so those aren't really difficult accommodations. Those are relatively easy. They're not like there are some people who need special equipment to be able to, read and write and do whatever it is in school they're doing. And that needs to be, it needs to be available. And it needs, people need to be able to access that. And, I don't know what the solution is to that. Sometimes it does cost a lot of money, and that is a problem. I don't know how the school systems there are, but here they're broke. They don't have any money. So that is an issue. I'm lucky because I had parents who made sure that I got exactly what I needed. And if the school wasn't providing it, they would provide it. So yeah, you need to talk to the right people and figure out what's needed. And then be open to doing it. That's the other thing is, this is a story I tell all the time. When I graduated from grade school and was going into high school. So here our schools go from like kindergarten to 8th grade, and then high school is 9th grade to 12th grade. And my grade school did not have a high school associated with it. So I had to switch schools. And when I started looking at schools, I called one school that was kind of my second in line anyway. But we called for me to go visit. And they basically said, well, you can come visit, but we're not going to make any accommodations for you, which A, is illegal. And B, it's just not fair. Now, granted, the only reason I wanted to go to this school is because my friend was going to the school, because I was 13 and that's what I valued, but, and it's much better that I ended up where I ended up. But, that should not happen. That should not happen. So yeah, it's really just about getting people what they need and then educating. So one of the things that happened when I went into a new school is that they played a video to the whole school about me, which is kind of embarrassing as a teenager, but was good because it made everyone aware, like, don't roughhouse around me, don't throw balls around me, don't, be really careful. She's not something to stare at. Now you know what the deal is. It's, it worked. It's all about educating them. And so, yeah, like I said, I'm very lucky because I didn't have a whole lot of issues. Certainly I had some, but not nearly what I've heard other nightmare stories. Yeah.
No, and you're right. That education is very key to moving forward, and I believe that's something you continue doing as well through public speaking and sharing your story, and then joining places like we have right now as well. And so one thing I want to ask you, going maybe a little bit more into something a little bit more concrete. As a person who is not necessarily in this situation like myself, what are some of the things that I can do to be more inclusive of people with different abilities?
Honestly, for me, it's always the little things. It's usually like when people actually talk to me and not just assume, something. So most of the time when I'm out in public, people either think I'm a child or they think I'm mentally disabled because I'm in a wheelchair. And so neither of which is true, obviously. So, that's frustrating. Try not to judge, before you start talking to them. And honestly, there are a lot of people who are very awkward around people in wheelchairs because they just don't know what to do. And 9 times out of 10, if you just ask us what you want to ask us, then we're happy to answer it, because we would rather tell you like the truth and give you an accurate answer than have you assume wrong.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, we're still people, treat us like you would treat anybody else. Yeah.
And I like what you said, coming with that, in that place of non-judgment and being open to listen and get the information. I think is a great piece of advice. We forget to do it very often.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very simple example, but for example, I went to a concert with one of my friends one night, and we went to dinner after, and it was in a casino. The concert was in a casino, and so it was at a casino restaurant, and this server came up to us and looked at my friend and asked her what she wanted to drink, and then looked at me and said, "Would you like a Shirley Temple?" And I was like, "Yeah, if you add vodka to it." And the lady just like she felt so bad, because she just assumed I was a child. And I'm like, okay, I am in like concert attire with a full face of makeup. Do you really think I'm a child? Really? But anyway, that kind of stuff happens to me all the time. All the time. Yeah. That makes a really good story though.
It does, and we smile about it. But I think at the moment, it for sure. I can only imagine how frustrating it must be, because it's not the first time, and
No.
And I think indeed, if people were coming with openness and curiosity, in the sense of trying to listen, it would make a huge difference in that interaction. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these things. There is one last thing, well, two last things actually I want to ask you. What the first one is, when we go on your website, well, apart from the amazing art that you're creating and beautiful things as well, and you mentioned about the link with animals as well. There's lots of them on there. But one thing I want to ask is, Rod Stewart, I mean, this is really, really cool, actually. And I want to know more about it. And what was the experience?
Okay, yeah. So I think 4 years ago, we have a big festival here in New Orleans called Jazz Fest, and it happens every year. It's 2 weekends out of the year, and it's huge. I mean, there's like 100,000 people that go every day, and they get the biggest names, and it's an all-day thing. It's really fun. There's lots of art and different stages and music and all kinds of stuff. And Rod Stewart was one of the headliners one day that year. And actually, he ended up filling in for Aretha Franklin, who became ill. And so at the last minute, he filled in. So my friend and I went, and we wanted to see him. So we camped out all day for a front row seat, 11 in the morning to 8 at night for a front row seat. And he came on, and he just connected with us. Like, he just started singing to us, and we he does this thing during his shows where he kicks soccer balls out into the audience that he signed. And so he gave me a soccer ball from the stage, and during his last song, he pointed at me and like mouthed, do you want to come backstage? And I was like, yeah. So he had security take us around to the backstage, and we hung out with him and his bands for like the evening. They had one of his backup singers was moving on to a Broadway production, so it was her last night with them. So they were having cake and drinks, and we had a glass of wine with him, and cake. It was amazing. And my friend, who was a little more grounded than I was at that moment, mentioned to him that I was a graphic designer. And I love music and I love designing for the music industry. That's my favorite industry to design for. And so she goes, haha, if you ever need something, let her know. Here's her card. And, it's Rod Stewart. Like, not thinking anything's going to come from that. But he turns around and he says, well, actually, I have a new album coming out in a few months. Do you want to give a go at the album art? And I was like, okay. And so, I asked him what he wanted. And of course, he didn't know because he's an artist. And he says, I'm going to have my manager, who we met that night, reach out to you next week with all the information. And, at that point, still, I'm thinking, that's never going to happen. Like, why would Rod Stewart want me to work on his project? He can have the most experienced designer in the world. Why would he have me do this? And so, surprisingly, she did reach out to me that next Tuesday and gave me the specs. And I, over the next 3 months, communicated with him through her, of course, about what he liked and what he didn't like. We went through several options. And of course, he had other designers working on this as well, because he was Rod Stewart. And at the very end, it came down to 2 designs, and one was mine and one was somebody else's, and he went with theirs, which is fine. It was what I designed and what they designed looked totally different. It was a totally different style. And he just chose that style, which is absolutely fine. But he paid me for my time. I have a check with his name on it, which is crazy. And I got that experience of working with somebody at that caliber, which is, it's invaluable, and then he also invited us back to a few of his concerts. So we've gotten to, go backstage again and talk with him and hang out with him a little bit. And he's a great guy. He's Rod Stewart. He's a rock star, but he's extremely down to earth, remembers my name, remembers working with me. He's a really good guy. His family's awesome. We really have it. I enjoyed working with him a lot. Yeah.
That's a really cool story. And indeed, I think it's a great example of actually, if you pursue your dreams, then things happen. They
do, and this last year has been like that for me. I've had a couple of really unique opportunities, not Rod Stewart, but a couple of really unique opportunities. And you just keep trying and you keep working, and eventually something works out. It takes time, but eventually something works out. With him, it was literally right place, right time. Yep. It's just the way it happened. It was great. I would love to work with him again. So if he's listening to this, Rod, hire me again.
Well, yeah, if he's listening to this, that would be great as well. I'll thank you for that, definitely.
Yeah, right.
Brilliant. Well,
I'm actually going to see him in a few weeks. So he's touring in the United States now. So I'm going to see his show in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that.
Brilliant. Well, I definitely make the most out of it and enjoy that.
Yeah.
And so the last question I'd like to ask you is, if you were to leave us with like one piece of advice, so actually maybe 2 pieces of advice, one for people with different abilities, what is one thing you would leave them with? And then allies and people who really want to become more inclusive, what is one piece of advice you would leave to us as well?
Well, I think it's kind of the same piece of advice for everybody. But it's really about finding what you're good at and finding what you love and then doing it. And so to find what you're good at or what you love, you just have to try things. You have to go out and try things. And I'm lucky because, my parents literally made me do that. I didn't have a choice. but of course there are people with choices out there, and you have to choose to be brave and go out and leave your house, and or get involved in something online or whatever it is, and just try things, because you never know. I mean, like the Rod Stewart thing, that was, I literally had been standing in the same spot for 9 hours and had chocolate covered strawberries and water all day. Okay, like I was super sunburned. I had no makeup on. I mean, you never know when an opportunity like that is just going to show up. Now the second time I saw him, I was dressed and had makeup on and all that. But anyway, you never know. And if you don't go out and try things, nothing's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just knock on your door without you doing something to make that happen. And so, and I realize like people with different abilities might not have as many opportunities easily, but now with technology, there's so much you can do from home, and not having to deal with transportation and not having to rely on somebody else to help you work. I mean, there's so many options out there, and it's just finding them and trying them.
I love it. Be brave. I think that's going to be my my phrase for the rest of the week, for sure.
Another T-shirt. We're just coming up with all kinds of T-shirts.
Yeah, we are gonna have to reconnect and then think about how we launch a whole line of it.
I know, we could do that. That could be fun.
Yes. Let's talk about that. Let's bring Rod Stewart in the mix as well.
Oh yeah. There you go. He's got some good ones. He's got some good lyrics. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having joined me today. What's the best way if people want to continue that conversation, want to reach out to you, learn more about you? What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, that'd be great. So my website is KAKArtNOLA, which is New Orleans, Louisiana.com. And that's my handle on Facebook and Instagram also. So you can always find me at KAKArtNOLA on Facebook and Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. And then you can email me through my website as well. So I'm really good about checking email. So that would be probably the best way. But yeah, if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, I post a lot of my videos of me painting and my process and things I'm doing, interviews I've had, whatever. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all this information in the notes of the podcast as well, so people can find it easily. Once again, thank you so much, Katherine, for being here with us and sharing those amazing stories and your energy. I mean, your energy is amazing. It's inspiring, it's motivating, and it was a great pleasure to have you here today.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks again.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.